Your soulmate is about to do something crazy because of your silence. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this story begins with a silence that neither person expected to become so powerful. Imagine two hearts that once shared unspoken understanding, only to find themselves separated by unanswered messages, unfinished conversations, and words that remained locked away. One person believed silence would protect them from more pain. The other believed silence meant it was time to let go. But neither realized that the quiet space between them would soon force both of them to confront emotions they had spent so long trying to hide. Stay till the end, because what happened next changed everything, not through fate or certainty, but through the courage to face what had been left unsaid. At first, your soulmate tried to convince themselves that everything was fine. They threw themselves into busy routines, surrounded themselves with distractions, and smiled whenever someone asked how they were doing. On the outside, they looked as though life had moved on without difficulty. Yet every quiet evening told a different story. When the noise of the day disappeared, your memory always returned. It wasn't dramatic or magical. It was simply the natural way an important connection can linger in someone's thoughts long after the conversations have ended. The silence between you became louder than any words either of you had spoken. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. Every day they wondered whether your silence meant you no longer cared, or whether you were simply protecting your own heart. They replayed old conversations again and again, searching for the exact moment when everything became so complicated. They questioned their own actions. They questioned their own fears. For the first time, they stopped blaming circumstances and started asking themselves whether pride and hesitation had stolen opportunities that honesty could have preserved. That realization stayed with them far longer than they expected. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. There came a night when they sat alone, surrounded by memories that refused to fade. They looked at old photographs, remembered forgotten conversations, and realized how many small moments had quietly shaped their heart. They understood that genuine connection isn't measured by grand gestures alone. Sometimes it's built through simple acts of kindness, patient listening, shared laughter, and the comfort of knowing someone truly understood you. Those memories became impossible to ignore, and they finally admitted that pretending to be unaffected had never been the truth. Then something unexpected happened. In a moment of overwhelming emotion, they almost made a decision they never thought they would consider. Not because they had lost hope, but because they were tired of carrying unanswered questions. They nearly convinced themselves to send the message they had rewritten 100 different times. They almost picked up the phone. They almost allowed every hidden feeling to become spoken words. They paused, wondering if reaching out would bring healing or simply reopen old wounds. That hesitation became one of the longest moments of their life. Listen carefully. The crazy thing they were about to do wasn't reckless or harmful. It was something that felt impossible to them because it required complete vulnerability. They were ready to stop pretending. Ready to admit that silence had never brought them peace. Ready to apologize for the moments when fear spoke louder than honesty. Ready to tell you that regardless of what the future held, they no longer wanted pride to write the ending of a story that still carried so much meaning in their heart. As the hours passed, they realized something even more important. They weren't searching for perfection. They weren't trying to erase every mistake or rewrite every chapter. They simply wanted one opportunity to speak honestly, without masks, without excuses, and without letting fear interrupt the conversation. They discovered that courage doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes courage is simply choosing truth after months of silence. What happened next changed everything. Instead of acting impulsively, they decided to slow down and reflect on the kind of person they wanted to become. They realized that meaningful relationships deserve patience, respect, and honest communication. Whether two people find their way back together or continue growing on separate paths, sincerity always matters. That understanding replaced panic with peace. It reminded them that the bravest decisions are often the ones guided by kindness rather than desperation. Stay till the end, because there is one final realization waiting for you. They finally understood that your silence had not only made them think about you, it had forced them to grow. It encouraged them to examine their own fears, appreciate genuine connection more deeply, and recognize the importance of expressing gratitude while the opportunity still exists. They promised themselves that they would never again allow fear to silence words that could bring understanding, healing, or closure. So if there is one message hidden within this story, it is this: silence can sometimes become a powerful teacher. It reminds us how valuable honest communication truly is. It shows us that appreciation should never be delayed, kindness should never be assumed, and meaningful conversations should not be postponed forever. Whether this story becomes the beginning of a renewed connection or simply the beginning of personal growth, one thing remains true. The heart changes when it learns to replace fear with honesty, regret with gratitude, and hesitation with courage. And sometimes, the most extraordinary decision a person can make is not something reckless at all. Sometimes it's simply finding the strength to finally speak the truth they have carried quietly within them for far too long. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because after that night, nothing inside them felt the same. They had spent so much time convincing themselves that staying silent was the safest choice, but now every passing hour felt heavier than the last. The words they had buried deep inside refused to stay hidden any longer. Every time they tried to move on with their day, your memory quietly returned, reminding them that some feelings cannot simply be ignored. Stay till the end, because the decision they were preparing to make would become one of the most unforgettable moments of their life. For days, they carried their phone everywhere they went. They opened your conversation countless times, stared at your name, and began typing messages they never sent. One version was an apology. Another was a confession. Another simply asked how you had been. Yet every message ended the same way, with trembling hands pressing the delete button. They weren't afraid of speaking anymore. They were afraid that after so much silence, their words might arrive too late. That single fear became louder than every other thought in their mind. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. They finally admitted something they had been denying for a long time. It wasn't your silence that frightened them the most. It was the possibility that they had allowed too much time to pass without showing appreciation for someone who had quietly changed their life. That realization stopped them in their tracks. They understood that life rarely gives endless opportunities. Sometimes all we truly have is the present moment and the courage to use it wisely. As another quiet evening arrived, they found themselves looking out the window, reflecting on everything that had happened between you. Instead of remembering only the difficult moments, they remembered the laughter that once came so naturally. They remembered conversations that lasted far longer than either of you planned. They remembered the encouragement, the understanding, and the feeling of being genuinely seen. Those memories didn't fill them with sadness anymore. They filled them with gratitude, because they finally recognized how meaningful those moments had always been. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. In the middle of that reflection, they made a promise to themselves. No matter what happened next, they would no longer let fear make every important decision. They were tired of wondering, what if? They were tired of replaying old conversations while imagining different endings. They wanted to become someone who lived with honesty rather than hesitation. That quiet promise became the first real step toward the person they had always hoped to be. What happened next changed everything. Instead of rushing into an emotional decision, they chose something far more difficult. They chose patience, self-reflection, and sincerity. They wanted any future conversation to come from a place of respect rather than desperation. They realized that meaningful words carry the most power when they are spoken with clarity, kindness, and genuine intention. For the first time in a long while, they felt peaceful because they were no longer hiding from their own heart. Listen carefully. There was another realization waiting for them. They understood that silence doesn't always mean someone has stopped caring. Sometimes silence is simply two people protecting themselves because neither knows how to take the first step. That understanding replaced many of their assumptions with compassion. Instead of imagining the worst, they began hoping for the best while accepting whatever tomorrow might bring with grace and maturity. As the days continued passing, something remarkable happened. The fear that once made every decision slowly lost its grip. Confidence quietly took its place. Not confidence that every outcome would be perfect, but confidence that honesty is always more peaceful than carrying unspoken feelings forever. They no longer wanted to be remembered as the person who stayed silent. They wanted to become the person who chose kindness, appreciation, and truth while there was still time to do so. So before this chapter closes, there is one final thought they carry in their heart. If life offers another opportunity to speak honestly, they won't waste it hiding behind uncertainty. They will choose gratitude over pride, understanding over assumptions, and courage over fear. Because they have finally learned that the craziest thing a person can do isn't expressing sincere feelings, it is allowing fear to convince them that those feelings should remain hidden forever. And as they looked toward tomorrow with a peaceful heart, they knew they were no longer waiting for the perfect moment. They were becoming the kind of person who creates meaningful moments through honesty, compassion, and the quiet courage to speak from the heart before silence has the chance to say goodbye. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this is the chapter where everything inside them reached its breaking point. They had spent so many nights convincing themselves to remain silent, believing that silence was the safest place to hide. But every sunrise made that silence heavier, and every sunset reminded them that another opportunity had quietly slipped away. They could no longer ignore the truth that had been growing inside their heart. Stay till the end, because what they were preparing to do would require more courage than anything they had ever faced before. For the first time in a long while, they stopped running from their own emotions. Instead of distracting themselves with endless work, endless scrolling, or endless excuses, they allowed themselves to sit in complete silence. In that silence, they finally heard the one voice they had ignored for far too long, their own heart. It wasn't demanding perfection. It wasn't asking for guarantees. It was simply asking for honesty. That realization was both terrifying and freeing at the same time, because they understood that the greatest prison they had ever lived in was the fear of expressing what truly mattered. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. They began writing a letter they never intended anyone else to read. Page after page filled with words they had buried for months. They admitted every misunderstanding. They admitted every moment they allowed pride to speak louder than kindness. They admitted how often they replayed conversations, wishing they had chosen different words. By the time they reached the final page, something incredible had happened. Their heart felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time, honesty gave them peace instead of fear. As they folded that letter and placed it beside them, they realized something that completely changed their perspective. They had spent so much energy wondering whether they would ever be understood that they had forgotten to understand themselves. They finally accepted that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the willingness to be genuine even when certainty doesn't exist. That simple truth became the foundation for every decision they would make from that day forward. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. They started noticing how much time had been wasted on assumptions. They had imagined conversations that never happened. They had answered questions no one had asked. They had allowed fear to create stories that may never have been true. Once they recognized that pattern, they made a quiet promise. From now on, they would seek clarity before believing uncertainty. They would choose conversation over imagination whenever possible. That promise felt like opening a window after years of living in a dark room. What happened next changed everything. They no longer looked at your silence as something to fear. Instead, they saw it as an invitation to grow. They realized that every season of quiet had taught them patience, every unanswered moment had taught them resilience, and every difficult memory had taught them compassion. Rather than feeling defeated, they felt grateful for the person those experiences had shaped them into. The silence they once resented had quietly become one of their greatest teachers. Listen carefully. They also understood something about themselves that had remained hidden until now. They weren't searching for a perfect ending. They were searching for peace. And peace could never come from pretending, hiding, or carrying endless regret. Peace came from living honestly, treating others with kindness, and accepting that while we cannot control every outcome, we can always control the sincerity of our own actions. That understanding transformed the way they viewed every relationship in their life. As another morning arrived, they looked at the world with different eyes. The weight they had carried for so long no longer felt impossible to bear. Instead, it became a reminder of how much they had grown. They smiled more easily, listened more carefully, and appreciated the small moments that once passed unnoticed. They realized that genuine happiness often begins when we stop trying to control every chapter and simply choose to live each one with integrity. So before this part of the story comes to an end, there is one truth they hope never fades. The crazy thing they thought they were about to do was never reaching out or speaking honestly. The truly reckless choice would have been spending the rest of their life allowing fear to silence their heart. Now they understand that courage isn't measured by dramatic actions. It is measured by quiet decisions made with honesty, humility, and respect. And as they stepped into the next chapter of their journey, they carried something far more valuable than certainty. They carried wisdom, gratitude, and the unwavering belief that no matter what tomorrow brings, a heart that chooses truth over fear will never truly lose its way. That realization became the beginning of a life filled not with perfect answers, but with meaningful conversations, authentic connections, and the quiet confidence that comes from finally living as the person they were always meant to be. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because after everything they had been through, they thought they had finally found peace. But life has a way of testing the promises we make to ourselves. Just when they believed they had learned to live with the silence, something unexpected happened. A familiar memory returned with incredible clarity, not to reopen old wounds, but to remind them of a truth they could no longer ignore. Stay till the end, because this moment became the reason they finally stopped hiding from the life they truly wanted to live. They found themselves smiling at memories they once struggled to think about. Instead of pain, those moments now carried gratitude. They remembered how your presence had encouraged them during difficult seasons. They remembered how your quiet confidence inspired them to keep moving when giving up seemed easier. They remembered the way simple conversations could turn an ordinary day into something unforgettable. Looking back, they realized that the greatest moments had never been the dramatic ones. They had been the quiet moments of sincerity that slowly built trust, respect, and understanding over time. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. They stopped asking themselves whether the past could be changed and began asking a far more important question. What kind of person do I want to become because of everything I've learned? That question stayed with them through every sunrise and every quiet evening. It became the compass guiding every decision they made. They understood that life is not only about finding the right people. It is also about becoming the kind of person who values honesty, patience, kindness, and courage every single day. As the days passed, they noticed something remarkable. The fear that once controlled their thoughts had slowly been replaced by confidence built on self-awareness. They no longer needed perfect certainty before taking meaningful steps. They had learned that some of life's greatest opportunities begin with simple acts of honesty. Whether those conversations lead to reconciliation, friendship, closure, or personal growth, speaking with sincerity is never wasted. That realization gave them a freedom they had never experienced before. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. One evening they opened a notebook filled with thoughts they had written during their hardest days. As they read each page, they realized how much they had changed. The person who once wrote from confusion was now writing from wisdom. The person who once lived with constant doubt was now choosing gratitude over regret. Every page became proof that healing is not something that happens all at once. It grows quietly through countless small choices to keep moving forward with hope. What happened next changed everything. Instead of wondering whether they had lost something forever, they began appreciating everything they had gained along the journey. They gained patience through waiting. They gained compassion through disappointment. They gained courage through vulnerability. Most importantly, they gained a deeper understanding of themselves. They realized that every meaningful experience, whether joyful or difficult, had shaped them into someone stronger, wiser, and more prepared for whatever the future might bring. Listen carefully. There was one lesson they knew they would never forget. Genuine connection is never built on assumptions. It grows through listening, honesty, respect, and the willingness to understand another person's perspective. They promised themselves that no matter where life led them next, they would never again allow fear to replace conversation or pride to replace kindness. Those values became the foundation of every relationship they would build moving forward. As another chapter quietly unfolded, they felt a calm they had never known before. They no longer measured success by whether every dream unfolded exactly as planned. Instead, they measured it by whether they were becoming someone who could love with sincerity, forgive with grace, appreciate deeply, and live with integrity. That change in perspective made every new day feel like a fresh beginning rather than another reminder of the past. So before this chapter closes, there is one final realization they hope will remain forever. The silence that once felt like an ending had quietly become the beginning of their greatest transformation. It taught them that the strongest hearts are not the ones that never experience fear. They are the ones that continue choosing honesty despite fear, compassion despite disappointment, and hope despite uncertainty. As they stepped into tomorrow, they carried no bitterness, no resentment, and no desire to rewrite yesterday. They carried something far more powerful, a heart that had learned to value every sincere connection, every meaningful lesson, and every opportunity to become a better person. And with that quiet confidence, they smiled, knowing that whatever happened next, they were finally living with the courage they had searched for all along, and that courage would guide every chapter still waiting to be written. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because after everything they had learned, they believed their heart had finally become quiet. They thought the long nights of questioning were finally behind them. But just when peace began to settle in, something unexpected stirred every emotion they had worked so hard to understand. It wasn't a dramatic event or a mysterious sign. It was a simple realization that arrived without warning, reminding them that some of the most meaningful truths appear only after we stop chasing them. Stay till the end, because this realization became the beginning of the most important chapter of their journey. As they continued moving through their daily life, they noticed how differently they reacted to the world around them. Situations that once filled them with frustration now became opportunities for patience. Conversations they once avoided now became chances to listen with genuine understanding. They realized that the greatest transformation had not happened around them, it had happened within them. Every lesson they had learned through silence had quietly reshaped their character. Looking back, they finally understood that growth often happens so gradually that we don't recognize it until one ordinary day reveals just how much we've changed. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. They stopped measuring love by grand promises or perfect endings. Instead, they began measuring it by the small choices people make every single day. A thoughtful word. A sincere apology. A willingness to forgive. A patient heart during difficult moments. Those quiet acts of kindness became far more valuable than anything dramatic. They realized that genuine connection is built one honest conversation at a time, and every act of compassion strengthens a bond in ways that are often invisible until much later. There came an evening when they found themselves reflecting on everything they had once feared losing. To their surprise, they no longer felt trapped by those fears. Instead, they felt thankful for every lesson hidden inside them. They understood that fear had once convinced them to stay silent, but wisdom had taught them that silence should never replace sincerity. That simple truth became one of the greatest gifts they had ever received. It gave them permission to stop living according to imagined outcomes and start living according to genuine values. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. They quietly promised themselves that every important person in their life would know they were appreciated. No more waiting for perfect timing. No more believing there would always be another opportunity. They had learned that kindness spoken today carries more power than gratitude delayed until tomorrow. That promise wasn't made out of urgency. It was made out of love, respect, and a deep understanding of how precious meaningful relationships truly are. What happened next changed everything. They discovered that the peace they had been searching for wasn't hidden in finding all the answers. It was found in accepting that some questions don't need immediate solutions. Some journeys unfold one step at a time, revealing exactly what we need when we're ready to receive it. That realization lifted a tremendous weight from their shoulders. They no longer felt pressured to control every outcome. Instead, they focused on becoming someone who could meet every outcome with integrity, compassion, and hope. Listen carefully. There was another truth quietly waiting beneath everything they had experienced. Every season of silence had prepared them for a season of wisdom. Every disappointment had strengthened their resilience. Every misunderstanding had deepened their empathy. They realized that even life's most difficult chapters can become valuable teachers when we choose to learn rather than remain bitter. That perspective transformed every painful memory into a source of quiet strength. As they looked toward the future, they no longer saw uncertainty as something frightening. They saw it as possibility. Every new day became an invitation to practice honesty, generosity, patience, and courage. They understood that while no one can guarantee how every story unfolds, everyone can choose the kind of person they become along the way. That choice, they realized, would always matter more than circumstances beyond their control. So before this chapter comes to an end, there is one final message they hope never fades. The silence that once seemed unbearable became the very place where their greatest transformation began. It taught them to value people more deeply, to speak with greater sincerity, and to appreciate the quiet moments that often carry life's greatest lessons. They no longer feared tomorrow because they had finally learned how to live fully today. With a peaceful heart, renewed purpose, and unwavering gratitude, they stepped into the future knowing that true courage is not found in never being afraid. It is found in choosing kindness, honesty, and hope every single day, even when the path ahead remains unknown. And as they continued walking forward, they realized that the story was no longer about the silence between two people. It had become the story of a heart that discovered its greatest strength by learning to live truthfully, love sincerely, and never again allow fear to have the final word. My beloved child, don't skip. Stay with me until the very last word, because this is where the journey finally finds its meaning. Every chapter you've heard has led to this moment, not to reveal a secret that changes the world overnight, but to reveal a truth capable of changing a heart forever. There were days filled with questions, nights filled with silence, and moments when it seemed easier to walk away than to face what was real. Yet through every challenge, one lesson remained unchanged: fear may delay the truth, but it can never erase what has been learned through love, kindness, and growth. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. As time moved forward, they stopped looking back with regret and began looking back with gratitude. They realized that every conversation, every misunderstanding, every smile, and every goodbye had become part of the person they were today. They no longer wished to erase the difficult chapters because those chapters had taught them compassion. They no longer wished they had never experienced disappointment because disappointment had taught them resilience. Even the silence they once feared had quietly become the place where wisdom was born. At last, they understood that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without carrying bitterness. Stay till the end, because something beautiful is waiting for you. One peaceful morning, they stood beneath the rising sun and made a promise that would guide the rest of their life. They promised to speak words of appreciation while there was still time. They promised to forgive without waiting for perfect circumstances. They promised to protect their peace without closing their heart. Most importantly, they promised never again to let fear decide what love, kindness, or gratitude deserved to say. That promise became the beginning of a completely new way of living. Listen carefully. They finally understood that the greatest miracle wasn't finding someone who could change their life. The greatest miracle was allowing the lessons they had learned to change the way they lived. They became more patient with others because they remembered their own mistakes. They became more understanding because they knew everyone carries unseen battles. They became more courageous because they discovered that honesty always brings more peace than silence. Those quiet changes became the greatest victory they had ever known. What happened next changed everything. The heavy weight they had carried for so long slowly disappeared. In its place came a calm they had never experienced before. They smiled without pretending. They laughed without hiding sadness behind it. They appreciated ordinary moments because they understood that life's greatest treasures are often found in simple conversations, shared kindness, peaceful mornings, and grateful hearts. The future no longer frightened them because they had finally learned how to live fully in the present. Stay with me just a little longer, because these final words matter. Every meaningful relationship leaves a gift behind. Sometimes that gift is a lifelong friendship. Sometimes it's a lesson that shapes your character. Sometimes it's the courage to become the person you were always capable of becoming. Whatever form it takes, genuine connection is never wasted. Every act of kindness, every sincere conversation, and every moment of understanding continues creating ripples long after the moment itself has passed. That is the quiet beauty of a life lived with an open heart. And now, as this story reaches its final page, there is no fear left, only gratitude. Gratitude for every lesson. Gratitude for every challenge that led to wisdom. Gratitude for every chapter that revealed the strength hidden within an ordinary heart. They realized that the ending they had spent so long searching for was never waiting somewhere far away. It had been growing quietly inside them all along. The moment they chose honesty over fear, compassion over pride, and hope over regret, the ending they dreamed about had already begun. So if this story leaves you with one final message, let it be this. Never wait too long to tell people they matter. Never let fear become louder than kindness. Never allow pride to steal words that could bring understanding, healing, or peace. Treasure those who encourage you to become a better person, and strive to be that kind of person for someone else. Life moves quickly, but a sincere heart leaves an impact that time can never erase. This is not goodbye. It is simply the closing of one beautiful chapter and the opening of another. Walk into tomorrow with courage in your heart, gratitude in your spirit, kindness in your words, and hope in your eyes. Trust that every lesson has prepared you for brighter days ahead. Believe that healing is possible, growth is real, and every sunrise carries another opportunity to choose love over fear. And as the final page gently closes, they smile with complete peace, knowing that the greatest victory was never about changing the past, it was about allowing the past to shape a wiser, stronger, and more compassionate future. That became the ending no silence could ever take away, and the beginning of a life filled with purpose, grace, and a heart finally free.